Hello and welcome to James Plays Games. Today I'm playing the playable prototype for Indivisible, the latest game from Skullgirls developers Lab Zero Games. Like with Skullgirls, the signature style of animation is prevalent in the characters, environments, and combat style. While the prototype has no storyline, it is more of a proof of concept, showing off the gameplay, characters, and enemies. You start off as Aina, a female warrior type character who really fits the main protagonist mold, and as you progress you are joined by three others, an archer named Zebe, a swordsman named Tungar, and a mage named Razmi. Many of the characters already have voice actors, which is a nice touch for what is essentially a playable demo, but the most noticeable was Zebe, who had a whole slew of arrow-related puns. The combat style reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy XIII, with the ATB gauge emptying and refilling after each attack. Back when I played Final Fantasy XIII, I found myself button mashing, even though I knew pressing X 1,000 times wouldn't really help in the long run. In the beginning of the Indivisible prototype, I didn't button mash at first, but I found myself doing so once I started unlocking the other characters. That being said, I much prefer the way Indivisible handled the combat system, as the attacks are more practical and stylistic, and it's much more satisfying when you defeat an enemy. As you progress through the prototype, you'll get an axe that you can use in battle, but you can also use it to climb walls, which is one of the most satisfying features in a game that I've played recently. You can also wall jump if there are two walls close enough to each other, but if they're not, using the axe will work just as well. I know that this is just a prototype, so specific details in the final game will likely be altered to maintain game balance, but the boss fights in this game, as few as there were absolutely terrifying. Especially that final boss, it took me about 5 to 7 tries to even get close to defeating it. Had I not finally taken care of it, I would have been very disappointed that I couldn't finish the prototype, but with enough time and perseverance, it finally got what was coming to it. Overall, I really like the Indivisible prototype, and I recommend it to anyone who's looking for a really interesting turn-based side-scrolling platformer. The final game is currently being crowdfunded, so go check it out if you're interested. Facts do not exist. There are only interpretations. You know, there is some truth to that statement. Welcome to James Plays Games. Today I'm playing Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. Now, I know I already wrote a review on Pixcelation and I gave it a 10 out of 10 as it deserved at the time. However, this video will cover some of the fallacies in the game that I've noticed post-review, especially now that it's probably 100% certain that we're not getting any more story content. Sorry to burst your bubble, NeverMind Game Over. For the first half of this video, I'll do my best to avoid spoilers as I detail the premise of what is the last Kojima-directed entry in the Metal Gear series, and I will do my best to warn you ahead of time when spoilers are present. Until then, you're safe. For those not in the know, Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was marketed as the connecting link between Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes and the first game in the series, Metal Gear, on the MSX all the way back in 1987. Long story short, fans are divided on whether or not it achieved its goal. Personally, I feel as if the story was extremely disorganized. Whether that's due to cut content or corporate meddling, we'll likely never know. In The Phantom Pain, you play as Venom Snake, or Big Boss as he's commonly known by his peers, as you rebuild your private military known as Diamond Dogs after the devastating ending of Ground Zeroes. Your goal is to get revenge on the enigma known as Skullface, while dealing with his weapon to surpass Metal Gear, and meeting up with a mysterious boy named Eli, the tribal code talker, and the near-nude sniper named Quiet. This is the part where the spoilers begin. I highly advise you to pause this video and come back when you've completed the game. You have been warned. Such a lust for spoilers. Who? The long and short of it is that you go through this game, this incredibly long game, thinking that you're Big Boss, the legendary hero who becomes the villain of Metal Gear, when in reality, you were just an ordinary mother-based soldier who had forced facial reconstruction to make you look like Big Boss. A lot of fans took this pretty hard because, in a way, it's Kojima pulling a major trick on the player personally. He's been known to pull tricks, don't get me wrong, but it's never been to this extreme. Some might compare this to the Metal Gear Solid 2 trick where you play as Snake for all of maybe an hour before you find out that the rest of the game you're playing as a new character? The biggest difference there is that you have the entire game to come to terms with that, and you actually team up with Snake for a good majority of the game. In The Phantom Pain, this revelation is made in the last moments of the game's story, so as the credits roll, you're asking yourself if what you just saw was actually what happened. You have no time to come to terms with the twist because, at least in my case, I played through the post-game missions with a feeling of irritation, and nothing you've done in the entire game really matters. I was more interested in where the real big boss was while we were over here fighting for what we thought was something relevant. I still hold to my opinion that the gameplay in this game is the best in the series' history, especially after going back to previous titles and having to readjust to the vastly different playstyles they exhibit. I guess I got used to having reaction time and being able to walk while crouching, which are both absent from games like Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3. I feel like the side ops, while at first are unique and kind of interesting, there's just too many of what feels like the same thing over and over again, and maybe that's because some of them are recycled over and over again. The fact that this game feels padded by the repeated main missions shows they either had no plan for this game, or their plan was meddled with during the production cycle. All that being said, I don't hate the game. Sure, I think it could have definitely been a little bit better, but I'm still willing to 100% it even if I'm not in a big hurry to do so. I know a lot of this video directly contradicted my written review, and for that I apologize. I likely rushed into writing the review and let how I felt back then dictate it, and as time went on my opinion changed. I don't believe that this game is anywhere near Game of the Year, but I know that's likely an unpopular opinion. But there are no truths, only interpretations, and this is mine, as convoluted as it may be. Disclaimer, the following video contains critique of a game that is still in development and is currently available via Steam Early Access. Many of the points I'm about to make may be made irrelevant later on in the development process. Thank you for understanding. Hey everybody, welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. Today, I'm going to be playing the early access version of RWBY Grimm Eclipse, which was so graciously given to us by the good people over at Rooster Teeth. For those unfamiliar, RWBY Grimm Eclipse is the official video game for the original animation created by Monty Oum. RWBY Grimm Eclipse is about what you would expect from a game based on RWBY. It's a 4-player co-op adventure that puts you in the world of Remnant, where you'll fight various creatures known as Grimm, while playing as one of the 4 members of Team RWBY: Ruby Rose, Wai Shni, Blake Belladonna, and Yang Xiaolong. At the time of writing this, there seems to be only 2 major maps that you can explore, and while it is early access, I don't believe that it's currently worth the sale price of $14.99, even considering the fact that there's plenty of content for about an hour or 2 of gameplay. I could see the price being a little bit more practical if maybe half the game were complete and there were about 5 or 6 fully developed maps, but with there only being 2, I'm afraid I must advise everyone to wait it out. While it could have been my computer because only certain games will run seamlessly for me, I noticed that my teammates were complaining of a lag and had to switch their graphical settings to potato mode, which I found did help in my case as well. However, the only time my game client ran seamlessly was when I ran it in a very small window, and it got a little straining on the eyes. The voice acting is actually really well integrated into the gameplay. There are no real cutscenes, but each level has an instructor from Beacon guiding you through the level with tidbits of knowledge here and there, and occasionally one of the girls will say something in response to the environment around you.
So easy.
I got the chance to play as RWBY, Weiss, and Blake before I completed the levels, but I was unable to play as Yang. I might go back and do so, but the characters I did play made the experience really fun. They each have a similar style of melee combat, but I discovered that both Weiss and Blake are able to launch distance attacks at enemies, which helped while I was attempting to heal. There is an interesting upgrade system that, like with most games of this style, allows you to choose an upgrade every time you gain a level. I was able to upgrade my character significantly with more powerful attacks, faster healing, and I was able to revive comrades faster as well. There are special abilities that can be performed, but I found myself ignoring them because of how fast-paced the action is. Because of how the gameplay is structured, I remember comparing RWBY Grimm Eclipse to a third-person version of Destiny with RWBY characters because of the frequent use of waves of enemies and defending an object from them. Let's hope that this isn't going the same direction as Destiny did for a good chunk of time following its release. Overall, as I said before, I highly recommend just sitting back and waiting for development to proceed. I'm not entirely sure why it was released as an early access title, because there's just so many kinks that need to be worked out, but I can see it becoming a truly amazing game if enough time and effort is put into it. Like I said, the $14.99 price point might be worth it one day, but this is not that day, unfortunately. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. Today I'm going to be playing a game that is very near and dear to my heart, as is apparent if you take a look at my Facebook and Twitter feeds. Today, I'm going to be playing Undertale. If you have not played Undertale, but you'd like to, you might want to refrain from watching this video just yet, as there may be spoilers. Besides, Undertale is the kind of game you need to play without any idea of what to expect. It'll have more of an effect on you that way. If you've dipped your toes into the indie game market, you've likely heard of Undertale. It's an extremely polarizing game because I have yet to meet a single person who thought it was just okay. Most people either completely adore it or absolutely hate it. Developed by Toby Fox, Undertale flips the RPG genre on its head with its use of a really interesting morality system. In Undertale, you play as a character of your own naming who falls deep underground into a world inhabited by monsters of all shapes and sizes, and you must journey through the underground to make it back home to the surface. Seems like a fairly normal story, right? Wrong. This is where a choice must be made. Will you play the game like traditional RPGs and slaughter everything in your path? Or will you attempt to resolve your differences peacefully, making friends with your enemies? Whichever path you choose, the game gives you the freedom to do really whatever you'd like. The guilt isn't brought on by the game. The guilt is brought on by your own morals being projected onto the game's character. It makes you wonder. In other RPGs, you're given the task of defeating countless monsters for the sake of grinding and leveling up, but what if you've always been the bad guy? What if you're the sociopathic murderer combing the countryside in search of blood? Probably not, but what if? What I loved most about Undertale is the writing and the characterization. It was really fascinating to see such a vast assortment of characters who all have something unique and interesting to say, all gathered together into one game. One thing you'll notice from the beginning is how you can interact with nearly everything. Even if the dialogue box isn't important at first glance, it's the sheer attention to detail that Toby Fox put into the game that consistently impresses me. Because of the title's presentation, it's allowed to take an approach that's less than totally serious and realistic, and there's a chance, if you're anything like me, you'll find yourself laughing out loud at certain parts of the game because of its whimsical approach to a seemingly dark storyline. One thing that really impressed me in Undertale was its use of the morality compass. Games in the past have tried applying a morality system to the actions taken in-game, but few have succeeded as much as Undertale has. Unless you do a true reset, the actions you take in one playthrough will not be forgotten. They won't let you forget. As I said before, you can either go through the game saving everyone, or you can go through the game killing everyone, and each path gives significantly different results. The feeling that comes from playing through the pacifist route and then playing through the no mercy route and seeing the villages empty and desolate just sends shivers down my spine. And if you have a soul, it will do the same to you. If you couldn't tell by now, I'm in love with Undertale. It's such a fun and entertaining adventure that truly perfects the use of moral compass in video games. And it has a really exciting and deep storyline at the same time. To think that this game was created by mostly one person is astounding and inspires me to actually get up and do something. If something as beloved as Undertale can be created by mostly one person, then anything can. So, if you're watching this right now, get up and do something. Make a video game, write a novel, record an album. Leave a comment and tell me what you're gonna do.
Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. It's a new year, and with it comes a few changes to our format here on the show. Don't worry, we're just doing some slight remodeling. You'll barely notice a difference. Firstly, we're dividing up the show into 3 parts. The premise, where I discuss the story of the game and any inspirations it seems to have taken into the context of the plot. The execution, where I exclusively talk about what the game did right and wrong with the gameplay. And finally, the conclusion, where I will cover any other points that didn't fit within the first 2 parts, while bringing the review to its inevitable conclusion. I think this will help to give everyone out there watching from home a clear idea if the game is something you'd like to purchase or if you'd like to pass for now. Today I'll be playing Bastion, a title that initially released in 2011 by Supergiant Games. Will I enjoy it? Will I hate it beyond compare? Let's find out in the premise. Bastion is one of those games that I couldn't really get into, but as time went on, I discovered that I actually enjoyed it more than I led myself to believe at first. Taking place in the wake of a cataclysmic event known as the Calamity, you play as the Kid, who, armed with his trusty hammer, must defeat the creatures known as Gasfellas and retrieve mystic cores in an effort to rebuild civilization on your Bastion, or a place or system in which something, in this case society, continues to survive, according to Merriam-Webster. Throughout the game, your overall goal changes from collecting cores to collecting shards, which will lead you to the conclusion that I will not spoil in this review. That being said, the way that the game interweaves the story with the various forms of gameplay was very interesting and always kept me engaged and fascinated with the presentation. Overall, the gameplay is pretty repetitive, with you choosing a location to explore, beating up on the various enemies the game throws at you, retrieving the core in some cases, or being introduced to a new survivor in others, and returning to the Bastion. However, I think this repetition actually benefits the game because the control scheme and battle style is really conducive to a top-down beat-em-up, which is basically what Bastion really is. Then, when you finally get lulled into that false sense of security that comes with a pattern, it shakes you out of it and allows you to experience something new, which is a really awesome concept. One thing that I figured out pretty early on is that Bastion is a very difficult game, and it doesn't help that it seems as if leveling takes place at a very slow pace, making grinding one of the most difficult things to do. From what I could guess, and I don't know this for certain, but I'm assuming that there were only 10 levels, which would definitely explain the difficulty, but I would be lying if I said it didn't irritate me. I will commend the variety of weapons that you can use during the course of the game, and the upgrades for said weapons help you become a walking force of nature. I found myself trying to achieve the various upgrades, but at the same time I really stuck to a couple of weapons that I found worked against the enemies that I faced. As I mentioned, the music was one of the first things that I noticed when playing Bastion. It utilizes really awesome western-styled acoustic guitar along with heavy-hitting drum and bass tracks that really help to convey that artistic steampunk universe that the title is set within. There are also some really awesome vocal tracks that are used in the title that pleasantly contrast with the aforementioned instrumentals. There's a minimum of voice acting, largely performed by voice actor Logan Cunningham, portraying an elderly stranger that you meet in your travels, and Ashley Barrett as a character that you meet sometime later in the game, but what is there adds to the experience and doesn't in any way take from the environment that the game presents. As a whole, I was very pleased with what I received from Bastion, and highly recommend picking it up at its normal price of $14.99 for the game, or $24.98 for the package with the game and soundtrack via Steam. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. Recently, I was able to secure my own PlayStation 4 after years of hoping and wishing and waiting for the price to go down, and not long ago I was able to pick up a game that I had heard a lot of consumer praise about, Life is Strange. In the past, I've been a big fan of episodic gameplay, as it divides up an entire game experience into small, digestible chunks that allow me to actually care about the characters as people, instead of a bunch of soulless pixels. That's probably because most episodic gameplay allows the player to take a swan dive into the story, making choices that will impact the future, or in this case, the past. Let's take a look at Life is Strange. Life is Strange is an episodic title developed by Don't Nod Entertainment, which is the studio responsible for the 2013 title Remember Me. Enter Blackwell Academy, where Max Caulfield is studying photography when she discovers that she has the ability to rewind time after witnessing a school shooting. Throughout the story, you must make specific choices that will impact the past, present, and future of the series as you know it, all culminating in a massive storm that will destroy the quaint Oregon town of Arcadia Bay by the end of the week, unless you can prevent it. Life is Strange differs from episodic titles like Telltale's The Walking Dead in many ways thanks to its initial setup. Having to deal with the flow of time opens a lot more doors than in a game where survival is the #1 priority, and the ability to directly change the past within the story is a nice touch. Stories dealing with time travel often don't seem to make linear sense, especially if they jump back and forth, but Life is Strange managed to make mostly everything in the timeline logical and reasonable. Granted, there were some logical fallacies within the game's structure, mostly brought about by a choice that you make later in the game. It's only a problem if you choose one of the final options, but it's fine if you choose the other. However, I won't spoil anything in case some of you haven't played yet. Much could be said about the dialogue writing of the series, however. Largely antiquated terms such as hella and wowzer are heard quite frequently, and besides that, the hipster teenagers are written like Steve Buscemi attempting to disguise himself as a fellow kid. The characters within the game are also given very questionable personalities that are more laughable than anything, and while the art style is very unique and interesting, there are times when it doesn't do any favors. Overall, Life is Strange is a very divisive title, one that has an abundance of flaws, but at least for me has enough that's enjoyable about it that I can look past the flaws and see a very emotional and intellectual story about time travel and how it applies to the life of an 18-year-old girl. Do I enjoy it because of its realism? No! Do I enjoy it because of the dialogue? Absolutely not. I enjoy it because it's a fun, cautionary tale that kept me guessing on how all of the puzzle pieces fit into the broad scheme of things.
Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. What would you do if time only moved when you did? I know that I'd probably just stay still forever because the flow of time is frankly the most terrifying thing I've ever faced, but that's neither here nor there. The point of that little excursion into the existential crises that many 20-somethings face is that I was given the chance to play an advanced copy of one of the most interesting and unique first-person shooters in recent memory, Superhot. Superhot originally started as a short prototype that was created as part of the 7D FPS Game Jam back in 2014, and only recently released as a fully developed game that expanded upon the initial concept of time only moving as the player character moves. While it was initially an interesting concept, does the finished product meet the expectations the concept demo raised? Let's take a look at Superhot. When I first opened Superhot, I wasn't sure if my copy was defective or if I was just bad at video games. Probably the latter, because the game is set as a classic game within a game where you have to navigate a control console in order to reach the file named superhot.exe. Upon clicking on the file, there's a loading screen that doesn't look like a loading screen, and it just kind of stays there for an indefinite period of time until it's finished loading, which kind of made me wonder if there was something I should have been doing to get out of the loading screen, but eventually it went away, so I didn't really bother, but yeah. In terms of gameplay, if you've played the original prototype, you know what to expect. You're placed in a location where you have to utilize time to get rid of as many red enemies as possible. I did appreciate the variety of weapons available in the full game, such as the samurai sword, which is oh so satisfying for up-close melee fighting, or the shotgun, which basically guarantees that you'll inflict some damage if you're aiming in the enemy's general direction. One weapon I didn't necessarily find enjoyable was the machine gun, which seemed as if it was really uncontrollable, which could have been because of the fact that my computer had a difficult time running it. Pro tip, don't play a game about time being slower on a computer that is already slow, because it will get very frustrating. I was impressed with the feature being added towards the end, which gives you the ability to switch consciousness with one of your enemies, but it seemed like a pointless move in the end because you could never really use it to sneak up on your enemies, and after a while it just became a chore. Overall, I did enjoy Superhot, but I will admit that it can get very tiring if you don't take breaks while playing. The concept is quickly established and rarely is anything changed as you progress, so it kind of feels monotonous, and I felt like I only stuck with it until the finale to see how the story would end. In regards to the story, I thought it was alright. It was certainly interesting, but I can't help but feel like I wanted more gameplay, kind of like what we got in the prototype, and instead we got a weak excuse to make the gameplay have a plot, which was just really unnecessary. To be honest, I would recommend that everyone wait until Superhot has gone on sale and pick it up then. It's definitely worth playing, but I can't honestly say that the current sale price of $24.99 on Steam is worth it. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. I'd like you to come back in time with me for a moment to the glorious year of 2005, when a certain game graced the world with its presence and introduced us all to the hallucinogenic style of Suda51. Before No More Heroes, Lollipop Chainsaw, and Killer is Dead, the notorious developer Goichi Suda gave us Killer 7. Before I get into the critique portion of this video, I want to mention that I fully acknowledge that Killer 7 pretty much makes no sense whatsoever. But I think that if you're going to dive into the war between Harmon Smith and Kunlan, you probably shouldn't bother taking it too seriously. It sure doesn't take itself too seriously, for what it's worth. Killer 7 is a game developed by Grasshopper Manufacture and published by Capcom on June 9th, 2005 in Japan, July 7th, 2005 in North America, and July 15th, 2005 in Europe. In the game's universe, global world peace has been established, but doesn't last long as a terrorist group known as the Heaven Smile emerges and creates tensions between the United States and Japan. In the game, you play as the various members of an assassination syndicate known as the Killer 7, but instead of playing as different characters, each member of the team is another persona of the leader, Harmon Smith. While much of the game makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, I don't think it's set out to necessarily be a logical narrative, foregoing that in exchange for a memorable, fun-to-play title that continues to one-up itself with each progressing level. It's the antithesis to a game that tends to take itself too seriously, like with certain entries in the Final Fantasy series. Before you begin playing Killer 7, you should know that the entire game's movement is on a literal rail, and in order to move forward, you press the A button on the GameCube's controller. That being said, the title takes full advantage of the rail system, making it one of the best hallway simulators out there. Your primary goal in Killer 7 is the eradication of the Heaven Smile, which are demonic humanoid bombs that, if they're allowed to get too close, explode on contact. Normally, they're invisible to the human eye, but your characters have the ability to scan for them, after which they'll be visible for you to seek out their weak point. If it's hit, then you'll be able to collect the monster's blood for healing and upgrading purposes. Each persona in the Killer 7 has their own unique personality and fighting style, allowing for tons of variation in how you approach a situation. There are some personae that wield handguns, one that wields throwing knives, and even one who uses grenade launchers if you're feeling a little underpowered. While certain scenes and battles in the game require certain personae, you can almost always switch characters from either an option in the menu or by visiting one of the many Harmon's rooms where you can also upgrade your character's abilities and save your progress. The biggest complaint that I have towards the game is that the control scheme is just a little irritating, especially when you're trying to shoot the enemy weak points and you have to hit a certain spot with unrivaled accuracy, but the joystick won't quite work in your favor. I get that it's an older game, but in certain circumstances, the difference between your character and the enemy being killed is as simple as the right shot at the right time, and it's very difficult to make that happen. In terms of the soundtrack, the only real track that I remember fondly is, interestingly enough, one that only appears for a very small segment near the end of each level called Rave On, which is such a distinctive track that you think might appear in other places, but unfortunately that is not the case. Though, with the score being composed by Masafumi Takada, who also composed for the Danganronpa series, I'd suggest checking out the soundtrack for yourself. Killer 7 is likely the kind of game that I will always have in my library, and not because the story is great or the gameplay is necessarily fun, but because it's such a uniquely driven game that is just so unlike other games of its genre that it's hard not to see why Studio 51's style is so distinct. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games? Back at E3 2015, a man named Martin Salim came to the stage in an effort to present his brand new IP, accompanied by the mascot character that he called Yarny. Captivating the audience with his emotionally powerful presentation, Unravel became a game that, at the time, I just had to play for myself, but only when it was nearing release did I actually decide to pre-order it. If I'm being honest, I kind of forgot about it after E3 was over, but I was quickly reminded why I wanted to play it so bad once I was able to try it for myself. Unravel follows the player character known as Yarny as they attempt to navigate through the various levels, utilizing the tools left behind and revisiting memories of an elderly woman, likely the person who created them. In terms of story, this is basically it, though as you progress deeper into the game, you begin to pick up on some possibly traumatic events that have happened in the game's past, though the specifics are shrouded in mystery. As Yarny, you have the ability to swing from tree branches as well as push and pull things every which way in an effort to complete the various levels using the environment in your favor. I found this to be particularly interesting as some things aren't as obvious as they might appear to be at first glance, leading to an unexpected solution that sometimes made me wonder why it wasn't obvious in hindsight. Immediately after starting the game, I noticed that the graphics in Unravel are some of the best I've seen in a long time. I feel like the game genuinely takes advantage of the PS4 to produce something that is absolutely beautiful to look at and to play. Environments in-game were rendered fantastically, and there's a strange satisfaction in maneuvering around the overworld, attempting to solve the various puzzles. Speaking of puzzles, Unravel brings back the classic difficulty that many of the platformers of old are famous for, to the point where it's nearly unforgiving. It's not any fault of the game itself, but rather it's been quite a while since I've been faced with a game that has challenged me as much as Unravel has. Unravel has a fantastic soundtrack, one that I was perfectly content with letting play in the background while I did other things. According to the website, the goal was for the soundtrack, quote, to be capable of both breaking and mending your heart, all without spoken words, end quote, and it definitely succeeded in that goal. The way that Unravel tends to pull at your heartstrings while simultaneously driving you to complete the game and figure out its secrets is a masterful concept that Coldwood Interactive succeeded in brilliantly. Now, let's see if this series becomes this generation's platforming franchise, similar to how Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon were for those of us who grew up in the era of the original PlayStation. Unravel can be purchased on PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One for a regular price of $19.99. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games? HITMAN is a franchise that seems to have withstood the test of time, but I haven't ever played any of the others in the series. So when publisher Square Enix offered us a review code for the latest entry in the series, I couldn't pass up the chance to check it out. Developed by IO Interactive, Hitman ventures into the realm of episodic gameplay. So while we did receive the season pass, only the first episode has been released so far, with the second coming in 2 weeks on April 26th. As such, the review will only cover the first episode, entitled Showstopper. Hitman follows the master assassin, Agent 47, as he is given targets for elimination. But, beyond that, there is a bare minimum of story in this entry in the long-running franchise. In fact, the focus seems to be on the sheer depth of gameplay, as you're able to approach obstacles from many different ways using many different disguises, and there is no one way to complete your mission. The first episode contains a brief tutorial taking place 20 years prior to the game's story, showing Agent 47's entrance into the ICA, and having his abilities tested, as well as the first major campaign where you must eliminate 2 targets in the middle of an extremely crowded fashion show in Paris, France. As there is no correct way to complete your mission, you're able to experiment with different tools, weapons, and disguises, but if you're like me and this is the first Hitman game you've played, prepare to have more error than trial. I found myself dying quite frequently and getting very frustrated because I couldn't figure out any alternate methods to take down my enemies. I'll give it to IO Interactive. They've managed to program the most hyper-realistic NPCs I've ever played with. I suppose that I've been used to NPCs who tend to act irrationally, so when I started playing Hitman, I quickly realized that these NPCs are essentially real people. When you act suspicious in front of them, they will follow you and automatically assume the worst. While this could be interpreted as irrational, it helped to encourage me to crank my subtle meter up to 11 so I wouldn't arouse suspicion. Also taking a step away from unrealistic gameplay is the removal of the health meter or health bar, making your ability to retain bullets very lifelike. This may be the most frustrating thing of all simply because it requires you to be 100% stealthy with a very, very little margin of error. Overall, I was very impressed with Hitman, and I'm excited to see where the story goes in future installments, as well as what unique challenges they'll come up with next. It's very difficult, and I would recommend anyone new to the series absorb the tutorials like a sponge, because I was stuck on the Paris campaign for several hours, just because of the sheer insanity of the mission. Because of the scale of this title, and even though it's episodic, I'm going to say that it's definitely worth the $60 price tag on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. Back in 2013, we had the honor of receiving a review code for The Witch and the 100 Knight for the PlayStation 3, but unfortunately never got around to reviewing it. So, when NIS America announced that a remastered version for the PlayStation 4 would be released, I just had to give it another go. If you played The Witch and the 100 Knight, you likely know what you're getting yourself into. Though, I will warn you, this game is unbelievably difficult after a certain point, so don't expect to be able to rush through unless you're an elite at RPG grinding. Let's take a look at Nippon Ichi's The Witch and the 100 Knight Revival Edition. The Witch and the 100 Knight Revival Edition puts players in charge of the titular demon, the 100 Knight, who has been summoned by Metalia, a malevolent witch with a burning desire to cover the world in the swamp she protects. Since you're practically playing as the evil minion, the unknown forces seeking to stop Metalia from succeeding are presumably the good guys, but since I haven't completed the game yet, I can't really know for sure. I applaud the writers of this game, as some of the best moments can be found in dialogue between the many characters, and Metalia is one of the most fun anti-heroes in recent memory. Another area the game succeeds in is its visuals. The character and background art is crisp and absolutely pleasant to look at. Unfortunately, the same can't really be said about the 3D character models, as the only thing I can compare them to is the 3D models from any media involving Vocaloid. Another thing the title succeeds at is its voice cast, which includes Sarah Williams, Erica Mendez, Christina V, and Natalie Hoover, among many others. Each character is paired with a voice that really suits them, which makes you really want to listen to all the various segments of dialogue, which, like I said earlier, is very well written. In terms of gameplay, most of the story elements take place in the visual novel format with animated sprites and well-drawn background art. But the exploration segments are presented in the form of a third-person adventure title. As I said before, the character models during these latter segments aren't terrible to look at, but it feels like they could have put a little more work into making them look as polished as literally everything else in the game is. Early on in the game, the difficulty spikes, making it nearly unplayable. I found that even though I was a good little RPG player and grinded significantly in the earlier levels, I still had difficulty figuring out which weapons worked well against which enemies and learning ways to avoid being killed in a maximum of 2 hits. Relying on a system of gigacals, which are like life points that deplete as you progress into each level and only replete upon returning to Metalia's home, is a strange device that seems unnecessary literally 99% of the game, only becoming relevant once you activate the special ability known as Chaos Revelation, and even then it could have had a better execution. It seems more reasonable for the gigacals to be replaced with just your overall health meter, which would replete not as you complete the level, but only once you activate Chaos Revelation, so the player won't be tempted to abuse the additional power and spam it against every single enemy. Though it does seem like you need that boost with the crazy powerful enemies that don't dole out enough EXP for what you're having to go through to defeat them, so yeah! With a catchy score by Tenpei Sato, The Witch in the 100 Night Revival Edition is one of those games that I could leave paused and just enjoy the background music. If you've played the Disgaea series, you'll likely recognize the music used, as Sato is responsible for both. For what it's worth, The Witch in the 100 Night Revival Edition is one of those games that I've enjoyed, and I will try to complete it at some point in the undetermined future. But I think the only reason I've enjoyed it as much as I have is because I didn't have to pay for it. That being said, if you're a fan of RPGs with fantastic 2D visuals, subpar 3D visuals, provides a very significant challenge, and features fantastic voice acting, then you may just want to ignore me and go pick up The Witch in the 100 Night Revival Edition at its regular price of $39.99 for the PlayStation 4. Patches O'Houlihan once said, "If you can dodge traffic, you can dodge a ball." Granted, he also said if you want to have a dodgeball victory, you gotta grab it by its haunches and you gotta hump it into submission, so I'll leave out the part where I question his ethics. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. Not long ago, I discovered a website that has really helped create content for this series, named Keymailer. Essentially, Keymailer provides a method of contacting game developers and publishers in regards to receiving review copies for AAA and indie titles. Thanks to Keymailer, developer GameSwing and publisher Curve Digital, today we're taking a look at the epic dodgeball-themed adventure, Stikbold. Stikbold, a dodgeball adventure, stars Bjorn and Jerome, 2 stars of a sport called Stikbold who are preparing to make up for last year's disappointing second-place win when a mysterious person dressed in a devil suit kidnaps their competition, one of whom happens to coincidentally be Bjorn's talented crush. Together, they decide to rescue the kidnapped women, which leads them on a wild goose chase that allows them to encounter a wide range of characters, such as a group of 70s-era hippies and a beach-based biker gang, to name a few. While it's called a dodgeball adventure, it's pretty much Dodgeball Simulator 2016. You have brief story moments, breaking up the pretty repetitive but fun gameplay moments. If you've ever wanted to play dodgeball without playing dodgeball, this is the game for you. While the story mode tends to be quite predictable, it's the gameplay that really makes Stikbold shine. Thankfully, I thought ahead and played with my DualShock 4 controller, which made the control scheme work like a charm. But I can imagine how it might get complicated if you're playing with a keyboard. With each level, you're put into a circular game arena with your opponent, and you're given a solitary dodgeball to work with. In order to eliminate your competition, you've got to hit them with the ball a certain number of times while avoiding casualties on your own side. Depending on the arena, this can be an easy task or a painfully difficult one. For example, there's a level that features a large van that occasionally drives through the area, and being hit by said van causes nothing but trouble. Another level takes place on a crab-infested beach, which is quite difficult because you've got to avoid the crabs, which slow you down, while trying to dodge the other team's attacks. I didn't necessarily mind the music, but it wasn't really anything that stuck with me after I finished playing the game. I remember liking it while I was playing, and I remember that it emphasized the playful nature of the game, but it wasn't anything memorable. Then again, the time gap between when I played and when I recorded this is pretty wide, so I may just need to continue playing to get a feel for the background music. Overall, I enjoyed Stikbold, a dodgeball adventure, because it's so different from anything I've played recently. I never imagined that a video game revolving around dodgeball would be fun or play well, but surprisingly this one does. I can't imagine playing with the keyboard, but the control scheme is well mapped for USB controllers, and it felt very comfortable during the high-intensity matches. If you're looking for intense story, don't bother with Stikbold. However, if you're looking for a fun-to-play game where a dodgeball is basically the meat and bones, then you found the right game. Stikbold, a dodgeball adventure, is available via PC and PlayStation 4 for $9.99, which is more than a fair price for a game this fun. First, there was Cookie Clicker. Then add venture capitalist. It seems there's something morbidly entertaining about games with the clicker variety, and those are just the ones I've heard of. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. Since I've created this series, I've played a lot of games that I might not normally write an in-depth analysis on, and today's game, Plantera, definitely joins that list. I forewarn you, Plantera is a clicker game that actually somehow costs money. If you're immediately turned off, I don't blame you whatsoever. However, I advise that you keep watching because you might change your mind. I mean, you might not, but who knows. I'd like to thank Keymailer and VaragTP for the review code. Now, let's take a look at Plantera. Plantera has virtually no story whatsoever, so I'll make this first part relatively quick. This is the kind of game that you'll play when you'd like to unwind after a long day at work, until you realize that, in a way, Plantera is essentially work. It's one of those games that you can't really play because there's nothing necessarily fun about it. It's formulaic, and if you're anything like me, you'll find yourself slouching to the side, mindlessly clicking the animals and crops so you can get more money to get more plants and trees. It's a cruel, never-ending process. In Plantera, the primary game mechanic is listening to the relatively interesting soundtrack while waiting for your creatures to farm and rake in that sweet, sweet dough so you can plant more trees so your creatures can continue to farm and make more money. Sound fun? Depending on how much time you invest into clicking everything in sight, you'll get enough money to buy advanced plants for your garden, or you can buy additional lots so your garden will become bigger, all in an effort to never stop planting. You will never stop planting. You will never stop planting. As I said before, the music in Plantera is very soothing and melodic, and it loops very well, but it does get quite repetitive, as does everything else in this game. I'm sorry, but I cannot recommend anyone buy Plantera for its current Steam price of $2.99. I don't mind these types of games. They're generally not my cup of tea, but I can't imagine anyone actually paying for a clicker game when there are so many others that are just as good, if not better, and cost absolutely nothing. If I were you, I'd wait until Plantera is made a free-to-play game, and even then I'd only play it in moderation, as you should do with clicker games anyway.
James Plays Games! James is a little predisposed at the moment. He's currently working toward graduation. I hope you're not too disappointed. Wait, what? No! You can't assault the headmaster! That's against school regulations!
Sorry about that, everyone. Well, we don't have much time before he's back, so let's get this review started, shall we? Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. It's typically a terrible idea to buy a console for pretty much one game, right? Well, that's exactly what I did with the PlayStation Vita back in 2014 for Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. After watching the anime series, and thanks to a thin new partnership with NIS America, I was given the opportunity to play a review copy, and I absolutely loved it. Now, thanks to a relatively new partnership with Spike Chunsoft, we've been given the chance to play the recently released PC port of Trigger Happy Havoc. Does it live up to its quite successful PS Vita counterpart? Let's find out as we take a look at Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is essentially a cross between Battle Royale and the Hunger Games, because it takes place within an illustrious school for only the most talented students in Japan, and you're one of many other students locked within the school, with your only way out being to successfully get away with murder. While at first everything is all hunky-dory, eventually the pressure gets too much for some of your classmates, and people are killed faster than it takes for someone to say Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. You're forced to gather evidence at the various murder scenes and present your case of whodunit in a class trial at the end of each chapter. If you get the culprit right, they get punished and you get to live another day. However, if you get it wrong, then the killer goes free while everyone else gets punished. Gameplay-wise, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is about 40% first-person exploration, 40% visual novel, and 20% Phoenix Wright. In fact, that they haven't created a crossover between Danganronpa and Phoenix Wright is curious to me, but I digress. Starting off the game, you'll immediately notice that the majority of the story is portrayed through the visual novel lens, and in time you'll be allowed to explore the school and interact with various environments. Eventually, one of the cast is murdered and you'll have to explore the crime scene and figure out who was responsible by examining evidence and acquiring truth bullets, which you'll use to attack other characters' arguments in the class trial. One of the coolest details about the exploration segments is that as you walk, your figure bobs up and down as if you're actually walking. While this is an option that you can turn off, I think it adds a cool realism to the way you move about the school. Overall, I think I'm confident in suggesting that Danganronpa is one of my favorite gaming franchises, and Trigger Happy Havoc is a solid title with a fantastic and emotionally driven story. I cannot recommend enough that everyone go pick up Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc at its regular price of $29.99 on Steam, or on PlayStation Vita for $39.99.
Welcome to James Plays Games! James thought he could get rid of me by making my unbearably explosive body detonate. But the joke's on him, as I have an infinite number of copies surrounding the school. What? What are you doing? No! Stop infecting me with malware! No!
Alright, I think he's gone for good. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games? Just when you thought there was no escaping Hope's Peak Academy, NIS America and Spike Chunsoft have made it so that mostly everyone can experience the sequel to Trigger Happy Havoc, which I remark is an infinitely better sequel in every imaginable way. Without further ado, let's take a look at Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair. Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair, originally entitled Super Danganronpa 2, Sayonara Zetsubo Gakuen, originally released in the West for the PlayStation Vita on September 2nd, 2014, and for PC on April 28th, 2016. While the premise is largely the same as its predecessor, there are key differences. Where in Trigger Happy Havoc you were trapped within Hope's Peak Academy, in Goodbye Despair you're trapped on the seemingly deserted Jabberwock Island. Where you were with one group of students in the first game, there are many new and familiar faces in this sequel. However, those of you who have played the first game will find that Goodbye Despair kept the parts from Trigger Happy Havoc that were enjoyable, such as the class trials, the third-person exploration, and improved upon them in nearly every way. Before you suggest that Goodbye Despair is just more of the same thing, I'd like to pause for a moment and let me tell you why you've never been more wrong. Yes, the formula from Trigger Happy Havoc makes a return, but with new features such as the ability to walk around the island in a 2D interface, the new environments and character art styles, and much more, it's a sequel that stands on its own 2 feet rather than overly relying on the first game. Yes, it does help to have played Trigger Happy Havoc to comprehend the universe and overworld, but to be honest, you could probably get through Goodbye Despair without having done so. It's just highly recommended from me to you. As I said earlier, the overall formula remains the same. Explore the island, meet the characters, say goodbye to one of the characters, gather evidence, and participate in the class trial. The biggest complaint that I had regarding the class trials this time around is that the logic they expect you to grasp is kind of far-fetched, but it requires suspension of disbelief just like any other anime-styled game. While the narrator explains that the minigames have been improved, I honestly felt like the Hangman's Gambit, which is making a return from the first game, was made infinitely more difficult, and in the implementation of the Truth Blades to fend off other characters' attacks was also a good idea in theory but didn't really work well in practice, especially when the logic is merciless and you have to know which item works in each scenario, or you'll just end up hurting yourself, literally. I also found that the third-person exploration, at least on the PC version, was a little difficult to maneuver. I can't remember if it was like this in the Vita version, but I definitely noticed it in the PC version. Panic Talk Action also makes a return, and while they do a poor job of explaining how this version of the game is meant to be played, once I got the hang of it, I actually kind of like this version better than its predecessor. There are other mini-games to be uncovered, but as I've only played the first trial for this review, I haven't experienced them since I played the Vita version over a year ago. I very much enjoyed the voice acting in both titles, but especially in Goodbye Despair. Among the notable cast members are Johnny Young Bosch, Bryce Papenbrook, Kyle Hebert, Todd Haberkorn, and Natalie Hoover, among many others. It's one of those games where it just wouldn't be complete without the actors who breathe life into the already compelling characters. It's rare when I can say that a sequel is better than its predecessor, but in this case I can honestly say that Goodbye Despair is a much better game than Trigger Happy Havoc. Don't get me wrong, I still love the first game because Danganronpa is one of my favorite gaming franchises, but this is a case where the studio brought the best concepts and mechanics in the first game into the sequel, and improved on mostly everything. I'm excited to see how much more the concept is perfected when Danganronpa V3 comes out. Welcome everyone to James Plays Games. My name is James and I play games. I don't generally buy consoles at launch, and it's not because I'm perpetually broke, though that is one of the main reasons. No, it's also because there's usually not a lot of games to play right off the bat, and waiting just kind of lets the companies iron the wrinkles out, if you will. So it wasn't until early 2016 that I decided to make the leap to the next generation with the PlayStation 4. In the early years of the console's lifespan, Ubisoft decided to make their own jump to the next generation with Assassin's Creed Unity, if you don't count Black Flag, that is. Saying the launch was a little rough is an understatement, but to be fair, it is an Assassin's Creed game, whatever that means. In fact, it's probably my least favorite Assassin's Creed game, and I still look back at the first one in the series as a horribly repetitive piece of crap. So yeah. Let's dive deep into the animus as we explore the memories of Arno Victor Dorian in Assassin's Creed Unity. Assassin's Creed Unity was released alongside Assassin's Creed Rogue, which is one of the only games in the series I haven't played, but I know it has a lot in common with Unity, as I kinda wish I hadn't played it either. It follows Arno Victor Dorian, the son of an assassin who was taken in by a Templar following his father's death. Years later, when Arno's guardian is killed yet again, he embarks on a quest to take revenge on those responsible, but he doesn't ever seem to care about who killed his biological father, and before you tell me that's covered in Rogue, that doesn't explain why Arno never shows curiosity or interest in the subject. In order to explain why I dislike Arno's character, let's first analyze what made Ezio Auditore such a great protagonist, and why Ubisoft has been trying, and failing, to recreate their success since Assassin's Creed Revelations. Ezio Auditore was a troublemaker and a playboy, but was also calculating, methodical, and it helped that he had prime motivation. Ezio Auditore also had a complete arc, meaning that we were able to step into his shoes through Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and Assassin's Creed Revelations, which gave him a simple 3-act structure if you don't count the movie that covers his death. If you look at any of the games since, Connor Kenway's story began and ended in one game. Shay Cormac presumably ended his story in one game. Aveline de Grand Prix had a DLC outside of her game, but beyond that, she presumably ended her story in one game. And now Arno Dorian definitely ended his story in one game. Even Altair ibn Ahad, one of the most cardboard cutouts of the series, got a major role in the second game outside of the series' debut, which gave him a great deal more character development that literally no one else in the series has had. It's interesting that for a series that until 2016 has prided itself on annual releases, they can't find the time to give their main characters the development they need for the audience to care about them. Yes, Unity gives Arno motivation through Delacier's murder, but it also makes you wonder why he didn't seek revenge on the person who killed his actual father, seeing as how the game seems to think that his failure to save him when he was a kid has haunted him for his entire life, but nope. Arno talks more about avenging Delacier than anything else, and I don't know if he ever even mentions his father's name outside of the prologue. It also tries to tell this tragic tale of star-crossed lovers. One's a Templar and one's an assassin, and fate has forbid them from being together. But they'll show that it doesn't matter if you want peace through control or free will. Love will strike when you least expect it. Except, it's not a convincing romance in the first place since it's not founded in reality, according to the reality they've given us so far. If we're to consider the reality of the series, Assassins and Templars are two sides of the same coin. One side wishes to establish peace through freedom, the other side wishes to establish peace through control. It doesn't seem all that different until you take into account their methods of achieving this goal, and then they couldn't be more different. Yet Ubisoft keeps trying to blur the lines between the two sides by making Shay Cormac abandon the Assassins for the Templars, while Arno is born to an assassin yet raised by and falls in love with a Templar. I know that, like in reality as it is in Assassin's Creed, the issues aren't black and white. There are some shades of gray, but it feels less like a morality lesson and more like they can't figure out what comes next in their own series. So they're distracting us with stories that are either predictable or don't matter. In terms of gameplay, I can't really complain. It's your traditional Assassin's Creed, but with a few polished features such as rifles, pistols, and other gadgets. Introducing the Phantom and Berserk blades, Unity allows players to silently dispatch or enrage enemies from afar, which definitely comes in handy during missions with swarms of guards to take care of. I found that I chose not to use those as much during the main missions as I was more focused on the story, but in the post-game I found myself having fun watching the guards fight amongst each other while my Berserker was picking them off one at a time. I found that some of the textures were extremely subpar, such as the hairs on Arno's beard, which reminded me of Snake and the Phantom Pain on PS3. And while I'd like to comment on the moments when I could see through Arno's model, it wasn't as bad as the stories I've heard from when it first launched, so I'm willing to look past that with hopes that they just had a hiccup with the next generation technology, and hope that it's improved in Syndicate. I found that there were some missions that were absurdly difficult, which had me off the walls in pure white-hot rage. But my goal of beating these games before I make a review of them pushed me forward, and in due time, the deed had been done, and I put Assassin's Creed Unity in the past. So, while Unity is definitely my least favorite Assassin's Creed game, I tolerated it for the most part. It didn't have a playable modern-day storyline, and the main character was kind of sort of the worst, and the plot was incredibly weak, but I mean, I guess it advances the storyline a little bit, and that's all I wanted, I guess? It wasn't awful, it was just pretty bad, and for that all I can hope is that Syndicate succeeds where Unity failed. Oh, and I can also hope that Assassin's Creed Empire is announced sooner rather than later, and that it's the best title to date. But we'll see. It's hard to hope when Ubisoft is involved. Hello! My name is James! And I... play games! I've said it before, and I'll say it again, it is amazing to me what Toby Fox has managed to accomplish in the aftermath of Undertale, which he created mostly by himself with the help of artists Tsuyoki, EasyNam, Marigo, and Guzusuru. In the year or more since its release, it's inspired countless songs, animated storyboards, and cover albums by musical artists like Norihiko Hibino, who was largely responsible for the in-game music in Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, and 4. If you didn't read the title of this video, you might be surprised that there have been games created in the vein of Undertale, and, well, let's just leave it at that, shall we? Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at some of the games that fall into this category, so... buckle up, buckaroos, it's kill or be killed. Back in 2014, Bannister Chava published an April Fool's piece on Pixcelation referring to a Last of Us themed racing game called The Fast of Us, and at the time I could not believe that such a perfect concept hadn't happened yet. Someone must have read my mind because an Undertale themed racing game is actually a thing, and believe it or not, it's hilariously fun so far. I say so far because Underracer is still in development, but a free demo was available via Game Jolt. Its clever merging of Undertale with its SNES graphics with Super Mario Kart, an actual game on the SNES, is something that kept a perpetual smile on my face when I decided to give it a try. As we speak, the demo contains a race against Flowey, Napstablook, and Toriel, as well as Sans introduction and Snowfall, but there's more than enough content available to decide if it's something you'll be interested in when the full game releases. Even if it's not, I'm sure we can agree that it's an interesting concept in the least, and I can't wait to see where it goes. If you've played Undertale, which I'm assuming you have because you're watching a video on Undertale Fan Games, you'll know that there were countless other humans who fell before the main character did, and Undertale Yellow seeks to tell the story of one of those poor unfortunate souls. The yellow one, obviously. If I didn't know any better, the level of quality and creativity in this one would make me think this was a sequel proper. In Undertale Yellow, you play as the human with the yellow soul as they fall into the ruins and must find a way to get home. However, there are significant differences between this version of the ruins and the version present in the main game. Flowey, the main antagonist of the original, serves as an ally and helps to save your game as you proceed. Toriel actually plays a significantly minor part compared to the original, and there are countless new monsters to encounter on your way further into the ruins. What interested me most was how much effort was put into emulating Toby Fox's signature style, including the monster and environment designs, the unique skill sets for each of the new monsters, and even the dialogue sounded like something he'd write. I liked the bosses they thought up, which provided just the right amount of difficulty while giving me reason not to just give up and resort to a genocide run. Though I may decide to do that in the future, I wanted to play a pacifist run on my first go-through to make sure that it's truly emulating Toby's style, and I wasn't disappointed where that's concerned. I'm super excited to see where Undertale Yellow goes in the future, and if you want to see what I mean, check the description for a link to the page where you'll find a free demo that covers the first major area. I never thought I'd ever say that Mega Man and Undertale would mesh well together, but after playing the demo for Mega Man x Undertale, I'm saying it. There's something really cool about traveling through a side-scrolling version of the ruins, fighting monsters and avoiding traps, all leading up to a boss battle with Toriel at the end. It was overall a pretty simple concept, but it got me interested in actually making it to the end, and even then I was having trouble beating Toriel, but like with most Urban Masters, I settled for spamming my Mega Buster as fast as I could until I beat her. I'm looking forward to more from this game, especially since I can only imagine how insane the battles with Sans and Asgore will be when the developer gets to that point. I didn't cover everything I wanted to cover in this video, mostly because for some games I just didn't know what I could say about them. But I will give an honorable mention to a few games that either haven't released a demo yet, such as Overtale, which looks to be phenomenal so far, and I eagerly await hearing more about it, or Underfell, which only has a small demo out, but so far looks super well made, or even Undertale 3D, which blew my mind, but doesn't look like it'll be made into a full game, so either way. If you would like to play any of the titles I mentioned in this video, check the description for links to their respective Game Jolt pages, and give them your love. Or don't. You don't have to listen to me. Welcome to James Plays Games. I'm James, and I play games. In late 2016, Watch Dogs 2 was released to critical acclaim, and from the beginning, there was little doubt that I would enjoy it more than the little bit I played of the first game back when it released in 2014. However, in an effort to be as transparent and fair as possible, I decided to give the original a second try, though it wasn't until after the second had come to a close. Today, I'm going to take an in-depth look at the Watch Dogs franchise, and while I know the following might be an unpopular opinion, I would like to invite you to leave a comment discussing your thoughts. Without further ado, we're going to Chicago. Normally, I'm not a fan of the age-old argument that many gamers use when they aren't satisfied with the finished, or unfinished in some cases, product of a title, especially when it has crashed the hype train. Quote, "It's not what we were promised," they say. Well, I'd hate to rain on your parade, buddy, but when it comes to Watch Dogs, what we were shown in the E3 2012 demo was pretty much what we got in the final product. I'm sure that by now, if you haven't angrily X'd out of this, grumbling about how wrong I am, then you might be wondering, but James, we didn't get the hacking wheel, or the mission to take down Joseph DeMarco, or the clever personalities that Aiden and Jordy exhibited, all of which were shown clearly in the demo, to which I say, yes we did, no one cares, and kind of, in that order. In the final game, the hacking wheel was replaced with the weapons gadgets wheel, and the option to hack streetlights, bridges, and steam pipes, among other things, was relegated to a temporary option that appears as you approach streetlights, bridges, steam pipes, etc. If you were steamed about the absence of the mission to take down Joseph DeMarco, I'd like to know why, especially when the dot connection exhibit is an actual place that you have to go to in a mission that takes place in the latter half of the game. Sure, the point of the mission is different, but it's more or less the same thing we saw in the E3 2012 demo. Now, if you're upset about the utter lack of personality among the characters, especially since the demo showcased two interesting, unfamiliar characters, that's actually a fair argument. Aiden Pierce is basically Batman in terms of personality. Not Bruce Wayne, just Batman. In fact, the only character who really left a significant impact on me is Jordy Chin, and he doesn't really appear more than 2 or 3 times in the course of the game, though his voice is heard throughout, so at least he's present. I like the introduction of Raymond Kinney, but that's mostly because of his significant appearance in the latter portion of Watch Dogs 2. He's another memorable personality, and while I haven't played the DLC where you can play as him, it's only a matter of time before I manage to do so, since he might be my favorite character. If you look at Watch Dogs by itself, it's actually not a bad game, but it doesn't really offer anything new. It's your standard revenge story, only in this case you're able to utilize hacking as a means to an end. In fact, I found that while you could get through the entire game without pulling out your gun, it's much easier and faster to just hide behind cover and massacre everyone in sight. While I didn't discover this until after beating the game, there are mini games that can be played, and one is extremely reminiscent of one of the last missions of the sequel where you can play as this gigantic mechanical spider. I found this to be one of the more fun things to do after beating the game, especially compared to the repetitive crime fighting and convoy missions. In all honesty, there are a lot of side missions that are just carbon copies of each other, and they take the fun out of completing the game. I want to avoid spoiling any significant plot details for anyone who's planning on picking it up after this video, but I felt while the story wasn't necessarily new, it added plenty of twists that I had a difficult time predicting. There were times when the plot twist just made everything more confusing, but for the most part, I think I figured it out. I may need to read up on the wiki a little more to make sure, however. The story wasn't necessarily new, but it was interesting enough that it kept me thinking about the ways it could possibly end. I wasn't a fan of the idea that hacking, while they marketed it as a revolutionary new concept, wasn't really on the forefront. In fact, it seemed more like a cross between Grand Theft Auto and Assassin's Creed with hacking thrown into the mix. However, to say that what we got wasn't what we were promised with Watch Dogs, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is wholly inaccurate. We could have used a bit more personality from Aiden, but there are reasons for his dark nature, and any real person would probably behave in the same way if they lost what he did in the way that he did. Now, let's take a look at the sequel, which features new characters, new locales, and new experiences. What separates the first Watch Dogs from its sequel is really as simple as this. From the beginning mission of Watch Dogs 2, I knew I would love this game. I never said that about the first entry, despite the fact that I did enjoy it enough to complete it. Marcus's adventures in the San Francisco Bay Area made for a much more enjoyable experience than Aiden's bleak and dreary revenge story, which is shown by the fact that I achieved the Platinum Trophy. They managed to fix any problems I had with the original, while carving out a brand new experience that will stick with me for years to come. Taking the general cue from Watch Dogs, the sequel is set in the San Francisco Bay Area in the aftermath of Aiden Pierce's digital conquest of Chicago. You're put in the shoes of Marcus Holloway, a young and enthusiastic hacker who dreams of joining the ranks of DedSec. But it's a different chapter of the enigmatic and edgy hacker group that is clearly inspired by Anonymous. Whereas the first game has you searching for who gave the order that killed your niece, the sequel takes things in a much different direction, putting you in charge of taking down the technology conglomerate that is using their CTOS 2.0 software to monitor and steal people's information on a massive scale. It's a more technology-based conflict, and it's only right given that the entire premise of the game surrounds technology. I've never been to the San Francisco Bay Area myself, but from what I can tell, the team at Ubisoft managed to capture the scenery rather well. I've seen a video of someone going to the area in-game where they live in the real world, and the two areas are quite similar. It's got me thinking, if a video game can capture a real-world destination with enough accuracy, what are the chances of games being used as aids for incoming tourists? If I wanted to go to, say, Tokyo, and there was a game like this set in Tokyo with all of the attractions as they were in reality, I could use this tool to become accustomed to the area before I go. I don't know, it could be handy. I also enjoyed the atmosphere of the sequel. It's got this flavor that was desperately needed in the original game. I don't know if it was the vastly different style of music available to listen to as you embark on your hacking adventure, or if it was just the overall brightness in relation to the dreary blue of Chicago, but there was something about Watch Dogs 2's San Francisco that really just struck me. Marcus and the rest of DedSec are real people with real personalities, which were desperately needed in Aiden's world. I would love to see another game with these characters at the forefront, but considering it doesn't look like the sequel had as big of a launch as Ubisoft would have hoped, only time will tell if we'll be getting a third entry in the series. If you ask me, I don't think we really need a new game in the Watch Dogs universe. I feel that if Ubisoft were to make a Watch Dogs 3, I would play and likely enjoy it for what it is, but it's not something I desperately need. I think it's great that you can play the entire second game without touching the first, but I think the biggest problem is that so many people weren't impressed with Aiden Pierce's adventure, they didn't even consider stepping into the shoes of Marcus Holloway, which in my opinion is a big mistake. Imagine what would have happened if players didn't like the overly repetitive nature of Assassin's Creed, and therefore didn't even bother picking up Assassin's Creed 2. They never have met Ezio, and one of gaming's greats wouldn't have had his time to shine. There's too many good things that could be found in Watch Dogs 2 that weren't present in its predecessor to pass this one up. So, in conclusion, if you were on the fence or even slightly curious about playing Watch Dogs 2, I say do it. I pre-ordered it, and I don't regret my decision in the slightest. I like to say that both games have their good things and not so good things, but they're each good for their own reasons. Watch Dogs was a driving, cinematic tale of revenge and regret, while Watch Dogs 2 is just as driving, but it's a story told from a different lens. It's almost like the first game took an approach like, you ruined my life, now I'm gonna leave a trail of blood until I find out who you are, while the sequel took an approach like, you ruined my life, now I'm gonna ruin yours, but I'm gonna have a lot of fun while doing so. Disclaimer, the following episode of James Plays Games contains massive spoilers for Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. If you would like to protect your innocence, feel free to pause this video and come back once you've completed the story. In any case, you have been warned. In the 2003 episode of South Park entitled Cancelled, the boys discover their world is merely a reality television series that is on the verge of being discontinued.
This gentleman at 8 o'clock, it's everyone's favorite show, Earth! It's been 100 Galgamars since we first took species from 17 different planets and put them all together on the same planet. They've fought, fallen in love. What will happen this Galgamar? Tune in Janamon at 8 to find out. It's Earth on Funko.
In the 2015 episode of Rick and Morty entitled Get Swifty, a similar situation is presented before the titular heroes as they are forced to compete in an interdimensional music competition, much like American Idol or The Voice, with the exception that the loser has their planet destroyed.
We asked them to show us what they got, and they did. Now we'll see which of them has got the most. 24 hours, 5 planets, 5 songs. But in the end, there can only be one planet music. All participation is involuntary. Disqualified and losing planets are disintegrated by plasma ray.
In both of these cases, the writers managed to pull off a meta-commentary criticizing society's fixation on celebrity and how often we forget that the icons we idolize are real people with real problems despite their presumed status or success. Countless examples of this meta-commentary can be found throughout all forms of media, but I use these specific episodes to illustrate the point that such a morality tale can be told without sounding condescending or preachy. Typically, such a tale can and usually is told in a short-form narrative, such as a solitary episode or cluster of episodes, and is never brought up again once it's concluded. I'd be willing to suggest that in most cases, this form of meta-commentary can rarely be implemented in a long-form narrative, and by long-form I mean across several years. Imagine if Vince Gilligan, the creator of critically acclaimed drama Breaking Bad, tried to make the audience feel guilty for picking sides in the conflict surrounding Walter White. In reality, he did nothing of the sort, as the audience knows that if they root for Walter to succeed, they're not terrible people for doing so. In the end, they acknowledge Walter is a fictional character, and their support of his drug-related enterprise isn't going to affect their lives one way or another. If this were to be our reality, I get the feeling like a lot of people wouldn't have liked Breaking Bad because it tried to preach to them the evils of producing and selling drugs instead of letting them figure that out for themselves. In that same vein, if Gilligan were to wait until the final episode to include a "winners don't do drugs" slogan, not only would we feel annoyed at him, but it would feel like we've been cheated of a proper ending to this amazing series. It's here where we finally get to the point of this video, and boy is it a doozy. Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony is the latest in the series of murder mystery simulators and presents a new cast of characters in the Ultimate Academy for Gifted Juveniles, rather than the classic Hope's Peak Academy that is present in other titles. It brings back the classic rhythm. The class is given a motive to kill one of their own, someone takes the bait, and then it's up to you to investigate the scene and figure out who done it. I enjoy the fact that the characters this time around are familiar enough, but there's still a sense of newness and intrigue surrounding them. In terms of characters, Killing Harmony is the first major entry in the series to feature a female protagonist in Kaede Akamatsu, except... wait, no, she's actually not the protagonist. In fact, the actual protagonist is, this guy. You know, Makoto. Except with a talent. And a hat. I don't dislike Shuichi. I just got really excited when I found out that Kaede was supposed to be the protagonist, and then when she ended up being the culprit of the first trial, my heart just sunk. I've always said I wanted a Danganronpa game to let you play as the Blackened, but I never expected them to go through with it. As the game proceeds, I'll admit, I grew attached to Shuichi, but I'm left to wonder how things might have gone if Kaede was actually allowed to develop. I could tell she was a good character, but she wasn't given the chance to really see the light of day, which I find to be a shame. It's clear to me that the game really benefited from the added processing power of the PS4 and PS Vita, since the other games, excluding Ultra Despair Girls, were initially developed for the PlayStation Portable and later ported to the Vita. I enjoyed the added freedom when moving about the school. In past games, movement felt very clunky, but moving and killing Harmony is more fluid, which was one of the first things I noticed when given control of the protagonist. In the Clash Trials, classic mini-games such as Hangman's Gambit make a return, but new games such as Argument Armament and Psyche Taxi, which are similar to other games with a twist, are added to liven things up. I enjoyed the addition of the Scrum debates, which are segments where you must argue a certain point against a fellow classmate with an opposing viewpoint, which are fun when you take the music into account. I enjoyed moving about the Ultimate Academy campus, which features individual rooms for each student themed after their ultimate talent, which were interesting because it opened up the possibility for new and exciting murder scenes to develop in ways that the series hasn't seen before. It's then we get to the story, which has an extremely polarizing and controversial ending that will either infuriate the audience or win them over for life, depending on their personality. I personally dislike the ending, but to each their own. In the lead up to the game's release, it was heavily implied that the cast of Killing Harmony would have no connections to the cast and events of the other games. However, one of the first things you see upon booting up the game is a compilation of the other titles, including the recently aired anime series, with the phrase, "This story is not over," which implied to me that it had to be connected with the events of the Hope's Peak Academy arc. I played through the game, heavily enjoying it, but not getting the link I was expecting until near the end, when it's revealed that the cast attended the rebuilt Hope's Peak Academy in the aftermath of the anime's Hope arc. I like this. I really like this. I felt like, whoa, everything's coming full circle, and I love the direction this game is going. I really want to emphasize that I loved this game before the final trial. It was very, very close to usurping Persona 5 as my game of the year. But then the final trial happened. In the final Clash trial, you manage to figure out that the mastermind behind this killing game is actually someone you've seen throughout the entire game, Tsumugi Shirogane, the ultimate cosplayer, and she reveals that she's none other than Hitler herself, Junko Enoshima, at which point I pretty much quit, at least mentally. If you're unaware, Junko Enoshima is literally to blame for every bad, monstrous thing that's ever happened in the timeline. Even when Junko is literally crushed to death, the reverberations of her actions can be felt for years to come. As a character, Junko is overplayed, to say the least. She's made a significant appearance in every damn game in this series, and I've had just about enough of her. So, when Tsumugi revealed that she was Junko Enoshima the 53rd, I lost a lot of hope for the ending of this game. However, I hadn't lost all hope for this game. I could have walked away happy if it ended here. Alas, it would seem Team Danganronpa must have understood this, because it's then they systematically destroy everything they've built over the past few years. It's then revealed that the killing game you've been participating in is nothing but a lethal reality series based on the in-universe Danganronpa series, which includes the Hope's Peak arc, meaning all of your memories you've received over the course of the game, including attending Hope's Peak itself, were implanted in you for the sake of creating drama. Tsumugi explains that Team Danganronpa has kept this reality series going for 53 seasons. Get it? V3, V is the Roman numeral for 5, 5-3 is the 53rd season, and the first 2 seasons were set in the Hope's Peak arc, so essentially, the entire series up to this point never happened, and therefore doesn't matter at all. Tsumugi gives what amounts to a morality lesson. The audience, which is clearly supposed to represent the players of the game, keep demanding that the Killing game continue each season because they enjoy seeing the intrigue, betrayal, and the final battle between hope and despair. So they continue the series because it's what the fans want, but the remaining cast want to live, which goes against the audience's wishes. I mean, it's said in plain detail that the true mastermind of the Killing game is none other than the audience themselves, and that sounds a lot like it's pointing fingers at us without actually pointing fingers at us. I'm aware that Kodaka, in an interview, has said something like, fans shouldn't read too much into the game, and I get that, but if he wasn't trying to suggest anything nefarious, why is it that the true mastermind is an audience of a Killing game called Danganronpa? It's just too convenient. In the metaverse of Danganronpa, that is the lethal reality show Danganronpa, people volunteer themselves to participate in the Killing game in much the same way that people might audition for The Voice or The Price is Right, only in this case, they're perfectly fine with killing in exchange for fame and fortune. I expected to play Killing Harmony and get a satisfying ending to the saga that began with Trigger Happy Havoc, but all I got instead was a Killing game where the characters were basically a bunch of weeaboos willing to kill people, all to immerse themselves in their favorite anime or video game. I don't know if I would feel the same way about this ending if there weren't so many damn red herrings and false conclusions throughout the game. In hindsight, there were a lot of things they brought up as if they were important, but were never resolved by the end, which implies to me that they were merely brought up as distractions meant to throw us off the trail. Then again, after all of those red herrings, Tsumugi can't reveal the truth quick enough, so who knows what was really going on. It's also disappointing that the game leads you on a wild goose chase that, when the truth comes out, nullifies everything you've done in the game to date. In the other games, there was a sense of numbness after all was said and done, because the characters you liked were killing each other off for what amounted to no reason, but it made sense in universe, and you were feeling numb because you enjoyed the characters and didn't want them to die. Killing Harmony gives you a numbness that isn't justified by the story. It makes you question why you spent so much time in this universe thinking of what would happen next, because in the end it was all a dream. I think I finally understand what it was like for the Mass Effect fandom after the ending of Mass Effect 3. It could also be that I understand what it was like for the Silent Hill fandom back when they stumbled across the secret ending where a dog was responsible for your suffering, only in this case, the dog being responsible is canon. In Killing Harmony, they make sure to say that there's a chance Tsumugi was lying the entire time about the reality show. But I can't bring myself to believe that. I mean, what proof is there that she had reason to lie about something that huge? I guess we'll just have to play the waiting game to see if they make any more games in the series. And if they do, I just hope they can salvage this ending. If not, then maybe it's for the best. After all, we're the true mastermind who keeps demanding that more fictional characters kill each other for sport. I guess I should just be thankful that there's a lot of endgame content, and I'll admit there is plenty of reason to replay the story, so hopefully that'll ease the pain. Who knows? Maybe with enough time, I'll come to appreciate the ending of Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. That said, I don't hate the game. I just really dislike the ending. It reminds me a lot of how I'd heavily dislike the ending of Metal Gear Solid 5, but I think the gameplay was absolutely fantastic. I actually really enjoyed Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony, and despite my complaints, I do think it's worth your money. I just wish this ending wasn't canon. Take from that what you will.